Hi, Mike Cadjo again from Procurement Foundry. We've got a bunch of attendees coming in for this next session. We are now in breakout session number 2. The first couple hours of today have been absolutely amazing. So really excited to have you all jumping into these sessions here in the morning. Just a quick bit of housekeeping. So this is a Zoom room. We do have Q&A. We do have chat available. And the chat usually gets pretty active, but also try and keep an eye on what the panel's actually talking about instead of just chatting amongst yourselves. And we will be monitoring Q&A. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A if you can. And then I'll come on at the end of this whole thing. I'm going to kick it over to Mickey Cloud. Mickey, thank you so much for agreeing to be our moderator for this thing. Mickey's from the Sasha Group, absolutely amazing organization, and really helped us out with this. So thank you, Mickey. I'm going to jump off stage now and let you guys talk. Have a great session, and I'll keep an eye on Q&A for all of you. All right, bye-bye.
Awesome, thanks, Mike. Introduce myself. My name is Mickey Cloud. I'm an executive director at the Sasha Group. We are a marketing consultancy within the VaynerX family of brands. VaynerX is an independently held private marketing communications holding company. So there's 8 companies underneath that. VaynerMedia is one. The Sasha Group, we work with kind of the mid-market and below, doing marketing and consulting. And so today we're going to be talking about the omni-channel strategies for the mid-market. What does that mean between the marketing teams, between procurement teams? I come from the agency world, so I only have ever worked with procurement when they're just trying to push me from 30-day terms to 90-day terms or whatever procurement likes to do there. I'll allow my esteemed panelists to introduce themselves because they'll do a far better job than I will. So Dana, you're next to me on my screen, so I'll tee you up first.
Sure. So I'm Dana Small. I've been in strategic sourcing for around 10 years now, 15 years in finance. Spent so far my almost entire career in pharmaceuticals, and I'm happy to be here to discuss my favorite category of omnichannel and marketing and strategy.
Awesome. Thank you, Dana. As I mentioned, we've got folks from both the procurement side and the marketing side. So Bill, you're up next on my screen. I'll introduce you.
Hi, everybody. Bill Blubaugh, I work for Utz Brands Incorporated. If you're in the eastern part of the United States, you're familiar with our potato chips, pretzels, cheese balls, those types of things. And we're also a new client to the Sasha Group and working with Mickey. So spent most of my career in food CPG, primarily on the snack side with confection as well as now salty snacks.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. And Manny, last but certainly not least.
Thank you. My name is Manuel Villarreal. I am the head of procurement for Novo Nordisk in the US, pharmaceutical company from Denmark. I've been in procurement for over 15 years and about 12 of them in the pharmaceutical space and mainly around commercial and indirect categories. So marketing and omni-channel is obviously something that has taken on a much larger importance over the last few years, and my teams have always been involved in dealing with those categories, and a lot of exciting changes happening. So I'll be looking forward to the discussion today.
Awesome. Well, let's kick it off by starting from the beginning, which to me is let's define omni-channel for mid-market companies. So if when I ask about kind of preparing omni-channel strategies, what context do you immediately put that in? How do you define it? And so Dana, maybe we'll start with you and just kind of go around. I know everyone brings a unique perspective to this.
Yeah, so when I think about omni-channel, what it really comes down to is ensuring at least, being in pharmaceuticals that you have the right messaging to the right audience, and also which digital channel it is, right? So if we're talking about patients versus HCPs, you're going to have different strategies, but you need to, within the patient group, have the same strategy or the same messaging across all platforms, and that so that patients understand what your drugs are and things of that sort. But I know there's many kind of different facets to what people think, omni-channel really is and does. And so, I'll let everybody else kind of interject in what they have to say.
Bill, how about you?
Yeah, I'm slightly different perspective, I think, just as from a marketing, brand marketing and media planning side. It's more around, I think about omni-channel as like, what are all the different ways and channels that you can engage with the consumer? So whether it's social, digital, e-commerce, your own properties, websites, what are all those channels that are available, and making sure that you have a plan and a partner who's helping you make the smartest choices across those channels to maximize reach and drive sales.
Awesome. Manny, how about you?
Yeah, I think very similar to what Dana was mentioning, right? Of being in the pharmaceutical space, omni-channel has different connotations because of the different audiences that we have. Not only perhaps consumer, but you also have healthcare practitioners. You've got healthcare marketplaces as well as payers. So it's kind of a broad range of touch points that you're going to have within your scope of customers or stakeholders in your communication. And the way I envision omni-channel is making sure that you've got an appropriate message. I think, Dana, you mentioned that it's the right message to the right audience in the right context, and it's a lot more focused around when they need that information, right? Not a massive push, but something that touches what they need when they need it. I think an added context that we have as well in the pharmaceutical space is geographical, because different markets have different regulations of how you can engage with healthcare practitioners or even the customer, right? The US is the only market where you can do direct advertising, except for maybe New Zealand. And then in other markets, you've got much tighter control. So you have to blend all those things together while delivering a consistent message for your brands and the consumers that are going to be requesting the information they need at the time.
Yeah, I think that's what's so interesting about our worlds is that we may be using common language, but there might be slightly different definitions based on what perspective you're coming from. And so we talked about, even just across your three answers, there's at least three dynamics of what does omni-channel mean. So you've got, from a pure marketing execution perspective, how do you have that cohesion and thinking about kind of all the channels that you might be reaching a consumer. In the healthcare world, that probably adds another dimension because of what you guys are dealing with providers and patients and HCPs and regulations that are certainly different than what Bill is maybe dealing with on a consumer brand, perspective. So, and then, Bill, you also touched on e-com. And so, right, omni-channel in a sales definition might mean, are we selling in every channel that we can, through wholesale, through retailers, through your.com, through Amazon, through Instacart, like all the different players that now exist. And so, I assume because because omni-channel can mean so many different things, and because you guys have these different perspectives, be curious, how you think about omni-channel changed over, even the past 5-10 years, but like what would have been some of the things that have been happening in your spaces that have made you kind of evaluate or reevaluate how you're thinking about omni-channel strategies?
I'll take it. I'll get started. I think digital, right? So obviously the aspect of information on demand, right? Where people are used to kind of just getting on their phones and accessing any piece of information that they need whenever they want it. So I think it's changed the mindset of perhaps flooding the airwaves versus positioning it in the right way for the right audience. I think it's also provided a lot more nuance in how you segment your target of who needs that information and when. So I think it's just that on-demand nature of information these days has been the major driver, and really the creation of this whole omni-channel space of that consistent branding. Before you had less channels, it was perhaps a little simpler 20 years ago, and now you need all the different vehicles of information, all the different ways to access it, and then it's added a lot of nuance and complexity.
My boss is a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk, and he likes to say, when people say, yeah, it was a lot simpler 20 years ago to do marketing or to do things, he's like, right, but no one's going to cry for you because it was simpler back then. Like, it's not going in the other direction. It's only going to get more fragmented. It's only going to get, because it's the consumer's driving that. Their attention is driving that. And so, sorry, but like that's business. That's why we're all here. So, would love, because we've got such a unique kind of mix here between, procurement professionals and then the marketing side, would love to learn about kind of at your individual organizations, how do you work together and how do you be the best partner for one another. What can marketing leads be doing coming to procurement to setting them up for success, and vice versa? I would love for you guys to talk a little bit about your experiences at your current companies and past around what does that partnership look like?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, one of the big things we always harp on is to engage us early on in the process, right? So if you bring us in last minute, sure, we can negotiate, but it's not the same as bringing us on early, and to be able to effectively have the same strategy and to have the same goals. Bringing us up to speed really late is really tough. And there's only so much you can do. So having people just letting you know ahead of time, and, so you can talk to the agency, and so you have that touch point, and so it's not a brand new relationship. I think that's always key in procurement, helping the marketing folks. I know a lot of times it's super busy, and so they struggle with, finding the time to go through the RFP process, and knowing sometimes it can be arduous and time consuming. But I think the earlier you can engage us when you want to make a really big decision, right, when it's in the millions of dollars, it is definitely to your advantage, because we're only here to try to help and support you, right? And bring us in just at the last minute, although we can negotiate, it's just not going to have the same results.
Yeah, I think that's key. It's like you don't want to use procurement as the closer, right? You want to be early on and making sure that you're clear on your requirements from a business standpoint. But then one of the big benefits I've seen in the advancement of a really strong procurement partner is also just like you get your head down, you're working on your business day to day, and they tend to give you fresh perspective. They'll bring in, hey, I know that this isn't a partner that we've worked with historically, but maybe you should consider X, Y, or Z because of, these reasons. And so, I see a lot of value in procurement providing, a broader perspective on meeting the need, because I think there's a tendency for business owners, and if you're running the business, just to kind of like make things quick and simple. So having the right partner helping you make sure that you're, considering more than just the quick and simple choice.
Awesome.
Or existing providers, right? It's the easiest choice to stick with what you know. And I think even if, yes, it's easier just to stick with somebody and bring them on board, but if you can just at least take a look at other providers out there, I think that it's a huge, benefit. Like, yes, I have my favorite, but at the same time, I still want to know what the marketplace looks like, especially when it comes to things like omni-channel and things that are so specific. You need somebody with that experience. You really want to test the market and see what's out there. And although I think you may have, incumbent providers that do a great job, there's no harm in ever just looking, I think, at other providers. So I think in doing that, that helps us bring to you that fresh perspective to kind of say, hey, there is other things out there. And hey, here's some market research to support why you might want to take a look at other providers and, see what else is going on in the space.
And I think the onus also has to be on us in procurement to focus on the right things, right? So establishing a partnership with our marketing colleagues so that we understand what they're looking for, right? That early involvement's important, but if you're connecting with them and spending enough time in that engagement and that getting to know you when possible, and definitely different organizations have different levels of openness to that engagement. Sometimes you have to, although we're in procurement, we have to do more sales sometimes than we have to do buying. But that becomes important because then you understand if there's a need for urgency, then you can go with established suppliers. If there's a need for innovation, then you can go out and ping the market, and just balancing and focusing on what the business needs while trying to maximize what we can bring to the table in value. It's a fine line, but it's I think creating that connection with the stakeholders, with the marketing teams, it helps everything out.
Yep. And you all, I think what was interesting in even our kind of meeting last week, you all have worked for bigger organizations where you are, that are maybe more specialized, and you've kind of had really large scale resources, but now you kind of find yourself more in a mid-market company. So could you talk a little bit around what that experience has been like, going from somewhere where you had maybe more resources at your disposal, but then now you're coming to a place where you've got to be more of a generalist, maybe a little bit of a knowledge of all, but maybe not master of one, so how do you kind of, not lose credibility to internal stakeholders, to external stakeholders? Like what's been some of the biggest learnings you guys have had kind of coming into mid-market companies?
I'll take that. I think one of the biggest learnings has been that prioritization of what the business is looking for, right? Sometimes in procurement, you can develop some category project plans that are a little bit more siloed, and they usually have some basis around contract expirations and things like that, which are definitely important and things that you have to keep an eye on. But I think if you can align the priorities with your business, that'll make sure that you're putting your resources in the right place and focusing on what you need to, right? It all becomes a balance of what can I get to, what can I achieve, while having the amount of people that I need to do that. And I think aligning that priority and that vision helps make sure that what you're bringing to the table is valued and adopted. Because if you're just working on your own siloed plan, it's usually a much harder sell and a much harder time in making it land. So it's I think if you take a little bit of time up front in that alignment, it makes sure that you're using your resources or your own time to the best value and the best return.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, getting up to speed on some of these categories, like you mentioned before, like if I just had advertising agencies in a prior life, now I have everything globally for sales and marketing, including professional services and meetings and events. So going to a procurement founder, going to these websites that are free, that you can find people who have done it before and are maybe experts, and you can pick their brain. That to me is the most useful thing, because the last thing I want to do is go to a business partner like Bill and have them say, oh, I want to run an RFP for market research and we need to look at this, and have no idea what he means by market research, or what types of companies I should be pulling, or what best practices there are for, whether it's contracting or pricing or things of that sort. So really leveraging all the great free resources out there, and touching base and networking with a lot of people has really made the difference in, I think, me going from such a siloed like category view to like everything under sales and marketing type of view.
Yep.
I think building on what Dana said, that was the thing that came to mind when you asked the question, Mickey, was like, just like, basically integrated solutions. And so like, when you're a smaller company, you don't have the luxury of maybe having like, somebody's just working on advertising sourcing, somebody working on just, media sourcing. It's like research is like, my ask was just bring me an integrated solution. I don't want to work with like 5 different people, because we're not big enough and we're not complex enough to need that. So we really needed a procurement solution that was more integrated and a holistic partner. So that's that I think
actually, that touches on a question from I see in the chat, which was what is the most effective agency structure, one versus many, to kind of support a solid omni-channel strategy? What works best? And Bill, that was certainly something that you and I have had a lot of conversations about, in the past couple of weeks and months of, hey, how do you guys think about this? Or how do you think about that? And we're in a position where at VaynerX, where we can provide kind of that integrated marketing solutions. And then if there is something that's outside or anything like that, we'll be upfront about that and say, hey, here's where we have a network of partners and how we work. But we have that's how we've entered our relationship, is kind of in that integrated, integrated solutions perspective. But curious, from all of you guys' past experiences and things like that, like when does, I guess, what's that tipping point? Bill, you said we're a little too small to kind of need all these different specialized agencies, but what is maybe that Mendoza line in your mind where, well, hey, maybe now it starts to make sense for us? Is it purely size and revenue? Is it other factors? What's that matrix of decision making for you guys?
I think like, the needs are still there, whether it's research or media or advertising or other professional services, but the amount of complexity and demand on those unique needs is much smaller. So that's kind of what led us, like, we're not investing as much, as I'm used to from a larger brand standpoint. And, so we need, and our budgets aren't as big, not only from a consumer standpoint, but just also as a business standpoint, we just don't have as much overhead. So, you have to be find those efficiencies and the scrappiness. But what I think the interesting thing about Sasha though is you know, you guys are kind of embedded in an agency that can flex and bring in other capabilities, and that was kind of one of the big, you know, distinguishing factors of, you know, just, you know, because we didn't have the time or energy to try to find an advertising media research firm. It's like, you know, so we wanted somebody who could, you know, flex with us.
Yep.
I think it comes down to too, a lot of the times of spend. So going from an Amgen to a Gilead to BioMarin, I mean, when you don't have to spend, you don't have the leverage. So when you don't have the leverage to meet like with the big boys, you almost have to look at who makes sense to be on your pattern of agencies. Yes, you want to consolidate where appropriate, but at the same time, you don't want to kind of have this super long tail of spend across all these very specialized categories, right? And so you need to find whether it's a holding company or, you know, an agency that can flex and bring in people. You really need to find a partner that's appropriate with your spend size. I've noticed that's the biggest change for me. In that you can't always go, when you're really small, you can't go to the bigger guys because you're a really small fish in a really big pond, and you're not going to get the attention you need. And so quality slips. And so sometimes you have to really align yourself with agencies and others who are the same business size as you are. Otherwise, you're really going to end up, you know, struggling with quality and then end up RFPing everything out over and over.
Manny, you look like you're about to add.
Yeah, I think it also depends on what the goals of your brand at the time, right? If you're looking a little bit more mature product or something like that, then you might want to go to consolidation and simplification. I've seen that when you're participating with brands who are perhaps more in a launch phase, and this might be more of a marketing thing, a pharmaceutical thing, then they want like creative ideas and new ideas and things like that. So it all goes down a little bit to budgets, it goes down to size, and it goes down to the goals of the brand, right? So because I've seen small brands that want the big agency, they want a stable platform they can partner with one agency for everything, right? But more of maybe a holding company partnership model. And I've seen large brands that want a bunch of flexibility and new ideas, and they're always bringing new things to us. So it's a fine balance. I don't think that's a question that I've ever seen anybody really anchor, because of the need that you might have as a brand or as a company. We in procurement, obviously, we're always trying to do that, a little bit of that consolidation, bring that leverage, and trying to bring more spend to the table to get a better deal if you want. And then the marketing teams, a lot of times they'll balance that out, right? Sometimes they want a lot more creativity. So I know I'm not answering the question, but I do think it's that flex of spend and leverage versus creativity and sometimes innovation. So.
Yep. And I think what's also interesting about when we talk about spend, and if we're talking about specifically media spend, you know, the evolution in the digital space, it's fundamentally different. Like we at VaynerX have spent a ton of money on social and digital biddable platforms, but we don't get a better rate just because we've spent more money the way you do in traditional. Like in traditional world, yeah, like big media holding companies can buy better rates because it's negotiated and upfront with networks and publishers and things like that. It's a biddable marketplace within Facebook, Google, Amazon, a lot of the big digital platforms. If you're a better practitioner, you'll get a better, you'll get a better rate, and that's on the agency. So it has been interesting, kind of from an agency perspective, talking with, marketing leads, with procurement leads about even kind of educating just how different buying media in the digital space is than the traditional, and why, I've had so many clients come to me and be like, oh, we're so happy to work with you guys. I'm sure you get the best Facebook rates because you've been working with them so long. It's like, that's not how this exists. It exists in a biddable marketplace. So even there's differences and nuances in between, and what can spend really, how does it give you leverage, and how do you utilize it? So super, super interesting. And Jordan just had a quick follow-up question as well, which was around, does a pay for performance model work within an omni-channel marketing environment, or is that ideal but too complex? So curious if you guys have ever worked with agencies or models where there's either kickers, revenue shares, or performance models built in.
Yeah, I have. I personally did one of the first ones when I was at Gilead. And as much as, like, from a procurement standpoint of view, you're like, this is great, they're putting money at risk and doing these things, it's so tough to manage and it's so time consuming. If you don't have a ton of time to do that, do not do it.
Totally.
That's what you'll spend your days doing, is reviewing scopes and going through works. It's just a lot. I mean, it's a smart idea, but practically I don't think it really motivates the people on the team, because are they really going to see that bonus or increase if they exceed their goals, or is it the company going to see it, right? So although I think it's a great idea, when it comes to like putting it into works, it really is a lot tougher than I think a lot of people realize. And unfortunately, I had to learn the hard way. So, but it looks like Manny's agreed.
I do. No, I think I agree with you completely, right? It depends on how strong a partner that agency is with you. I mean, it's the nature of supplier relationship management and procurement, right? If sometimes you try to boil the ocean, you don't get there. It's kind of how much time do you have, how important that agency relationship is to you, that you're going to be able to not only have your time, but your stakeholder time in the evaluation, KPI, and SLA tracking. It sounds great. We all love it, right? In procurement, especially, fees at risk, and maybe some targets for productivity and things like that make for great contracts and really cool deals on paper. But unless you've got the time to track it and the reporting mechanisms to track it,
Yeah.
it ends up being more of a headache just tracking than the actual just performance management of it. Yeah. So it works for some, but you need to have the time to do it.
Yeah, like I think of more of like a pure play e-commerce business, it could make a lot of sense for it, because that the tracking it's kind of inherent in the platform. But yeah, like an omni-channel type of strategy where you're maybe not spending as much in just like one or two channels, it does become complex. I know Mickey and I tried to figure something out for our relationship, and it just got to be. And also, I think there's other thing too, is like the priorities were just not. They have to be on priorities as well, and so we weren't prioritizing like e-commerce where we could necessarily track as much. We're prioritizing e-commerce, but just from a size of business, it wasn't. It didn't make as much sense. So that was another thing that kind of complicated it in structuring. Not just the tracking, getting the incentives aligned.
And I think this question speaks to kind of broader just KPIs, and how do you make sure you get what you measure, right? And I think we all kind of know that. And so like, how do you guys think about KPIs around when marketing and procurement are working together, right? Like how much of that upfront conversation when you guys partner together is it around, well, what are you ultimately trying to achieve, and what are those business objectives, and how are we going to measure them? So I'd be curious to kind of see from each of your perspectives, because I think I saw a question from Brett, like, are we looking for better deals, or are we looking for better results? And so I think there's some tension in that. I'd be curious to hear your guys' perspectives on how you kind of talk about and align on KPIs.
Yeah, I think marketing is one space that you really have to understand that you can't really, creativity is a little bit different than buying a widget, right? And so getting that quality creative person may be worth the extra money to spend versus having another agency, do it cheaper. It's kind of like those funny memes where they show the Mona Lisa and this hand-drawn picture of like, you can always get it cheaper, creative cheaper, but do you really want it? And so I think having that understanding is a huge thing when you think about getting into KPIs and SLAs. They've got to be quantitative and qualitative, because can you really say, oh, well, this artistic wasn't done on time, great, but at the same time, if it's 2 weeks late and it's the best, creative strategy you've ever seen, it's probably worth it, right? So I think it's just one of those things that has a little bit an extra layer of complexity that's not in the standard like procurement type of viewpoint when it comes to those things, right, with KPIs and SLAs. So that's why it's having that good mix of quantitative and qualitative, I think, is really key.
I think we want both, right? We want good and we want
good
deals.
It's an and question.
But that's actually true. I mean, in some of the vendor selection processes that we've done, because sometimes they're bid, sometimes they're not. Cultural fit and team alignment is also part of it, right? And I think we need to recognize that the nature of marketing teams and marketing goals, that fit is important. And so sitting from a procurement perspective and saying, no, I'm just going to go completely quantitative and I need measures and tracking, there can be that soft side too, and putting it and recognizing it, I think works in aligning.
And I think
Yeah.
but what Dana was talking about, that qual and quant kind of perspective, I'd be curious. We've worked with some clients where we collaborate as an agency with procurement and marketing. All three kind of get together and say, all right, here's the scorecard we're going to look at to judge how well this relationship is going. And we come and revisit that annually, quarterly, like every twice a year, whatever that looks like. So be curious, because and then deciding what goes into that scorecard, really is super important to make sure that the agency and client are aligned, and then that marketing and procurement know what everyone's kind of holding hands and jumping in on.
And I think that's some of the reason too why I've had such issues with the pay for performance, because you get a lot of, the agencies don't want to see, all these qualitative because somebody had a bad day today and now we're not getting graded right. And you can only have so many quantitative, right, of things. So it's a really hard mix, I think, in coming up with the right scorecard that both can agree on. But it's interesting. You have to take both into factor because, as Manny was saying, there is this cultural fit that is so key. And honestly, I've seen agencies win it just because of that fit. I mean, it just can make or break things, or seen agencies lose because they're fighting between each other in the room. So it does matter, right? And it needs to be on the scorecard, but what percentage, should it be in weighting and prioritization, I guess is a good point.
Awesome. There's a lot of Q&A questions coming in now, which we really appreciate. And so I'll be trying to hit all of them as much as I can. I think there's one that's a little bit just from left field from what we've been talking about. I'd love to hear you guys' perspective. How has COVID-19 impacted your short-term and long-term omni-channel strategies, or just business in general?
I'll start. I think it's definitely accelerated the digital aspects of omni-channel, right? Just positioning all the different remote connection points that we can have with physicians or consumer. I think the direct consumer side stayed similar. I didn't see that much of an impact. Some of the other engagements, especially with healthcare practitioners, those channels, those digital connection points, definitely a lot of projects accelerating in that space. To be perfectly in the pharmaceutical space, Dana, maybe you can add, I'm not sure in the consumer and stuff like that, but we actually became a little bit more important because our marketing spend stayed somewhat consistent. And as we know, in COVID, there were a lot of other areas and industries that were extremely negatively impacted. So our dollars became a little bit more valuable. So when we were having some discussions with media agencies and stuff like that, we became a little bit more of an important client, so to speak, because we didn't see the fluctuations that the others. I mean, fortunately, I know that a lot of other industries were not on that boat, and that is unfortunate. But acceleration of digital and just a little bit more importance if you were able to keep your budgets.
Yeah, I think they kind of reassessed the strategy on mix, right? So you've got all these different digital channels, but what's the right mix? And knowing that maybe traditional media is kind of going a little bit away, and everything's moving to almost all digital, especially with the younger generations. With streaming and all those things around, I think it's just reassessing what is the right channel mix for your brand and for your strategy to make sure that you are maximizing revenue across the channels. But yeah, the doctors too. I mean, no longer can you really go in person to them. So, that changes our sales, strategies too, right? Where it's almost completely all digital. And do we need print? And do we need these things? Or is it just print on demand and send out? So it definitely has had a very interesting impact, but I would focus, or at least for me, my focus has really been on what is the right mix moving forward, right? And where do you put the budget dollars when you have a smaller budget? What's going to be the most impactful? Because you can't do everything. And so having a good strategy in place will help do that.
It was a massive impact on the food industry with like the online grocery, and it's like the acceleration of e-commerce and in food. Food was kind of one of like the slower categories within e-commerce until COVID.
Mhm.
So we're seeing like 200% growth rates in e-commerce. So shifted a lot of money into those platforms as a result of COVID that we would not have been doing pre-COVID. So getting on Instacart, getting on Amazon and GoPuff and sites like that became a priority because that's where the shoppers were going. So.
Yep. And Susanna had a great follow-up question, which I'll just steal, but from which is, do you feel that the changes that have been made as a result of COVID are sustainable, and are they changes that you're seeing in a positive way for the business?
We believe, and based on everything that we're seeing, that we're repeat rates and it was inevitable, I think, with online grocery. It was growing, but it was still a relatively small piece of the category. But I think this is just sort of accelerated and a term trend. And a lot of people have now all of a sudden become expert and comfortable with, because that was the biggest challenge for online grocery, was to get onto the platforms and shop online for food. And so there's a lot of research out there to indicate that this is a change. It's more sustainable. Certainly the rates will probably slow down, but online grocery shopping is, I think, here to stay.
I have to agree. I do a lot of it, and I never would have done it prior to COVID. So that's perspective. Like, I'm not going to Costco anymore. Somebody can deliver it to me.
But I imagine as well, we launched a podcast, or in the process of launching a podcast, and I interviewed someone who works with healthcare systems, primarily kind of with hospitals and things like that. And the big change he was talking about was just the acceleration of telemedicine visits, right? Where some hospitals were doing 25 a month, between doctors, and now they're doing 2,500 in a day kind of thing. Just that exponential, that acceleration. We've seen it in delivery, we've seen it in food, but we've also seen it in other ways of kind of digitally delivering your services, and thinking about what's your value you ultimately provide as a business, as a brand, as a company, and how do you maybe need to rethink how you deliver that. So I'm sure you guys on the pharma side have seen that as well.
Completely. I think how we engage with healthcare practitioners got flipped upside down in a day. Literally, everything shut down in a day, and we had to connect. Pharmaceutical companies had to connect with doctors in a completely different way. So it accelerated all of these technologies for digital engagement. Sustainable into the future, I think, which was the original question. Probably. I think, like Bill mentioned, this accelerated a trend that was already there, and but I think that's the big question that probably most pharmaceutical companies are dealing with right now. Is what's that balance? Is it going to come back to a lot of in-person? Is it going to stay? What's going to happen with things like conferences and education events and all of that? So I probably don't have a good answer because we just don't know. I think the field has been prepped in many of on the technology side, but then what's going to be the preference moving forward to actually do it? Don't know.
Another question specifically for Manny and Dana around given that pharma marketing is regulated by the FDA, how much time do you need to spend with medical and legal reviews? Like how should their teams be thinking about that?
Months. I'd say weeks, but I think that's being that's not even makes sense. It's probably months. And it does, especially in the agency world, it can cause a lot of churn and a lot of extra dollars being spent, right? So if you have reworks and they keep going through back and forth, we spend a ton of money on just reworking things. And no, you can't say this word, just tweak it a little bit. Okay, now you got to redo all the copywriting again. So it can be a budget killer too, but it takes forever.
100%. I think I agree. The review cycle is what's the issue, right? So making sure that things are tweaked. And and the one thing I would say, one of the efforts that we've had is streamlining that review process internally. Both pharmaceutical companies I've been with, that's always a balance, right, of trying to streamline the process, while getting the right level of review and risk management. But then the other thing that we've done recently is try to go out and engage and talking about those pay to performance and those things. We have started to build some contracting language into, hey, I'm not going to pay for 42 reviews if this is where does the fault lie in that rework, and I'm not going to pay for 42 of them because you had to go back to the review panel so many times because you made a couple mistakes. So that's also a balance you have to do because it is a budget killer. It can sap like it can churn hours like crazy.
Well, we're running up on time. I got a couple more questions though that I did want to have some good discussion around. So we talked a lot about kind of the impacts that digital has had, the impact that COVID have had. How do you individually stay up to date on consumer marketing and then in the procurement side, what, you know, the impacts that might have to your roles? Like how do you guys stay up? Marketing, we talked about how like, yeah, it was simpler 20 years ago, but like that genie's not going back in the bottle. So how do you guys stay up to date?
I read, I blog, I read other people's blogs and then blog about it. I mean, basically just getting on LinkedIn or on sites and talking with people, and lots of reading and unfortunately digital reading. But that's personally how I do it.
The same as me. It's like we just try to, you know, good source of insight is from also analyst reports, you know, because they have a lot of people looking at trends, you know, longer term as well. And so they just there's not a shortage of information on the topic, right? And I think it's just getting to those sources that you feel good about, you know, going back to and trusting.
And sources like Procurement and Foundry, right, and other places.
You beat my plug then.
I mean, not to say it. Hopefully, I'm going to get a paycheck for that.
Yeah,
but
Mike. You know, Mike's still here. He's still listening. You didn't have to. Yeah.
No, but I mean, honestly, there are other great. You know,
PayPal's on the way.
Great ways to connect with people and stay up to date. So, you know, just to connect. To me, I've said it before, right? Earlier on, networking is huge, and so places where it's just networking, whether you have your supplier teach you or you have other people who have done it for a while, I found is probably the best way. And I think that's why I do blog, is because I've done it for 10 years. And so I can share my experience with people and then connect and network and do it. It's probably the easiest way, but I enjoy talking. So
I will say the one thing, suppliers, a lot of suppliers are churning, especially the ones in the consulting world are churning out papers. So I think, to Bill's point, material is not lacking. It's just finding the ones that apply or help you, because especially at the beginning, we actually had a graduate, like a rotation program person, and we asked her to weed things down, right, when things got started, because everybody started just getting so much information on COVID impact. We're like, okay, can you grab a couple of these and just, what does this really kind of mean short term? But yeah, LinkedIn's a good source. Procurement Foundry, some of these connection services, and then suppliers have good resources. But I just saw something pop up. Yeah, information overload is definitely a thing, right?
A real thing.
Yeah.
2020. Well, my last question, I'd love just to hit on real quickly is what keeps you guys up at night? What are things that you are, you know, is a challenge you're working on, but is the thing that wakes you up in the middle of the night, or is the first thing you're thinking about when you wake up in the morning?
Can I be a smart ass and say my 2-year-old?
Hey, I'm right there with you, Dana. I've got a 2-year-old as well, and I was up for most of the night last night with her.
I mean, I feel like there's the pace of business is so like different now, and like you're never off now that you're at home, you know. And so I actually am having a tough time just sort of like shutting it down at night, you know. And like there's this sense of like, wow, it's like, you know, you don't have to go somewhere to work now. You just are, you know, you can always be working. And I think that's one of the things that keeps me up at night is this new normal of
right. How long are we doing this?
Yeah, exactly.
You have to set good boundaries for yourself. That's what I've learned. It's really tough.
Yeah.
I say to myself, I'm not opening up my laptop before 7 a.m. because it's sitting in my room, and I could just go check what was, you know, somebody's emailed me, but I won't do it if I set this boundary. I'm like, and it's not open before 7, at least that won't keep me up this night. I'll just be looking on my work phone instead.
Well, I think the other thing too is like back to this whole theme of omni-channel, strategy is that, like there are so many options now. And like, you question yourself, are you choosing the right 10? Whereas in the past, it used to be TV, you knew what your answer was, whereas now it's like, am I making the right choices,
I think change fatigue and just focus on the team, right? So everything's changing so fast that are we adapting and focusing our priorities in the right one, to Bill's point, right? Are we picking the right thing to focus on? Or are we going to get blindsided by something at some point? So just trying to quiet down the noise a bit and focusing on the right thing, because it's a little too much right now, to be honest.
Well, Mike's here to kick us out, so appreciate your guys' time today and the discussion. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Amazing conversation. Lots of feedback, both in the networking channel and as well as in the Slack channel, as well as the chat. Thank you so much. We have recorded this, as I've told everybody, and this will be available after the conference. We're going to do a little bit of editing on it, but not very much. And now's the time for you to take a bio break. You got about 15 minutes. We're going to set up the next sessions and click on the interactive agenda. We've got media buyer coming up, as well as the agency dating game, which should be interesting. So thank you very much to all of you. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks for the plug for Procurement Foundry. The checks are on their way, and I really love this. So I think we should do another one of these. Definitely some more content around this in the future. So let's talk about that maybe next week after I have a chance to survive this one. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks,
Thanks so much. Bye bye.
Thanks, Mike.
Great
Thanks,
session.
everyone.